The grand hall of the Irathan Palace was cold and dark, carved from the bones of an ancient creature that had once ruled this world. Tall pillars stretched toward the ceiling, their jagged edges casting sharp shadows under the dim glow of blue flames. The air smelled of metal and dust, the scent of an empire on the edge of ruin. At the center of the hall sat Queen Scifi, her tall, armored figure resting upon a throne made of polished black stone. Her mandibles twitched in irritation as she watched the uninvited guest step forward. A human. Captain Elias Carter walked with steady steps, though he could feel the piercing stares of the Queen's guards all around him. They were warriors, their exoskeletons gleaming in the firelight, their sharp, curved weapons resting against their arms, ready to strike at a moment's notice. He knew they didn't trust him. He could see it in their rigid stance, in the way their clawed fingers tightened around their weapons. But Elias was not afraid. He had traveled across the stars for this meeting, and he would not turn back now. Queen Scifi's voice broke the silence, low and sharp like the crack of thunder. "Human, you dare stand before me?" Elias bowed slightly, not too much, just enough to show respect without appearing weak. "I come in peace, Your Majesty. Humanity wishes to speak with you. We wish to offer our help." The Queen's dark eyes narrowed, her long fingers curling against the armrests of her throne. "Help," she repeated, as if the word itself was poison. "Your kind does not help. Your kind interferes." Elias expected this reaction. He had read every report about the Urathan before coming here. A once great empire, now broken by war. A proud species that had lost too much to ever trust easily. He knew that to them, humanity was nothing but a stranger, a force they did not understand and did not wish to. Still, he had to try. "I understand your hesitation," Elias said carefully, "but we are not your enemies. We know your war with the Dikar Empire has brought great suffering to your people. Earth does not seek to rule over you. We only wish to stand by your side." A ripple of anger passed through the gathered warriors. Murmurs of disapproval filled the air. Scifi raised a hand, silencing them instantly. She stood from her throne, stepping down the stone steps until she was face to face with the human. She was taller than him, her kitten-covered body radiating strength and authority. Her voice was quieter now, but no less fierce. "Do you think we are weak, Captain Carter?" she asked. "Do you think the Irathan are so desperate that we would accept the kindness of strangers?" Elias held her gaze. "No, I do not think you are weak. I think you are strong. But even the strongest sometimes need allies." For a moment, there was silence. Then, to his surprise, Scifi let out a sharp, bitter laugh. She stepped back, shaking her head. "Allies?" she repeated. "The last time my people trusted outsiders, they betrayed us. They took our world, our children, our future. And now, you come here, speaking of peace. No, Captain, I will never accept you, human." Her voice trembled slightly, though whether from anger or something else, Elias could not tell. But he saw something in her eyes, something hidden beneath the rage. Pain. Elias took a slow breath. He had known this mission would not be easy. Trust was not built in a single day. "Then I will not ask you to accept me," he said calmly. "I will only ask you to let me prove that we are not like those who hurt you." Scifi said nothing. She only turned away, walking back to her throne. The warriors around her remained still, their eyes locked on Elias, waiting for the Queen's command. Finally, Scifi sat down once more. "You have one chance, human," she said coldly. "One chance to show me that your words are not empty. But if you fail, you will not leave this planet alive." Elias nodded, his heart steady. "I accept." The room was silent as the Queen lifted her hand and made a single sharp motion. The doors of the grand hall creaked open behind him. "Go now," she ordered, "and prepare yourself. Tomorrow we will see if you truly deserve to stand before me." As Elias turned to leave, he could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had won a chance. but nothing more. And in the eyes of the Urathan, he was still an outsider, still unwelcome, but he was not giving up. Not yet. Elias Carter stood outside the grand hall, his breath steady but his mind racing. The Urathan had given him one chance, one opportunity to prove that humanity was different. But how could he convince a species that had spent centuries learning to hate outsiders? The sky above was a deep shade of violet, with two pale moons casting a dim glow over the ruined city. Cracked towers stood in the distance, silent reminders of a once great civilization, now brought to its knees by war. Urathan workers moved through the streets, repairing what they could, their movements slow and tired. The weight of loss hung over everything. A sudden voice broke through the silence. "You should not be here, human." Elias turned to see a Urathan warrior standing nearby, her exoskeleton dark and worn from years of battle. Her 4 arms were crossed over her chest, and her piercing green eyes studied him with suspicion. "You don't trust me either, do you?" Elias asked, offering a small, tired smile. The warrior didn't return it. "Trust is not given freely among my people, not after what was done to us." Elias knew he needed to understand their pain if he wanted any hope of changing their minds. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Tell me why your people hate outsiders so much." For a moment, the warrior was silent. Then she let out a low, bitter sound, almost like a sigh. "Come with me, human," she said at last. "You wish to know the truth. Then I will show you." Elias followed the warrior through the ruined streets of the Urathan capital. As they walked, he saw more of the devastation, buildings reduced to rubble, statues of past rulers shattered beyond recognition. Even the air smelled of old battles, of fire and metal. Finally, they reached an old structure, its walls covered in strange carvings. The warrior led him inside, where the glow of blue crystals illuminated a series of murals painted across the stone. Elias stepped closer, his eyes scanning the images. He saw a time of prosperity, tall towers, grand cities, Urathan families standing together in peace. Then the colors darkened. A new species arrived, tall, armored figures with glowing eyes. The Urathan welcomed them. They shared their knowledge, their trust. And then the betrayal began. The next murals showed war, the outsiders turning against the Urathan. Their cities burned, their people enslaved. The once proud civilization was shattered, forced to flee into the shadows. Elias clenched his fists. He had read about the Urathan war with the Dekar Empire, but he hadn't known this. He hadn't known how deep the wounds ran. "This is why we will never trust your kind," the warrior said. "The Dekar came with promises of peace just as you have, and they left us with nothing but ashes." Elias turned to her, his voice steady. "I am not Dekar. Humanity is not Dekar." The warrior narrowed her eyes. "And yet you come offering the same words they once did. Peace. Alliance. Why should we believe you?" Elias took a deep breath. "Because we know what it's like to be betrayed too." The warrior tilted her head, waiting. Elias stepped closer to the mural, tracing a hand over the cracks in the stone. "Humans were not always the strongest species. We were once vulnerable, divided, and time after time, we placed our trust in others, only to be broken." He turned back to her. "But we never let it destroy us. We learned, we grew, and we chose to be better. We chose to help others, even when we had no reason to." The warrior studied him, searching his face for deception. Finally, she spoke. "You believe your people are different." Elias nodded. "I do." For the first time, the warrior's expression softened, just slightly. She turned away, looking back at the murals. "Queen's Kira will not be so easily convinced," she said. "But if you truly believe your words, human, then prove them. Show her that you are not the enemy she fears." Elias straightened. "I will." The warrior glanced at him once more before stepping aside, allowing him to leave. As he walked out into the night, He knew the road ahead would not be easy. But now he understood. The Irathan were not just warriors. They were survivors. They had suffered more than he had ever imagined. And if he was going to change their minds, he would have to do more than speak. He would have to fight for their trust. And he would not fail. The grand hall of the Irathan palace was colder than before. The blue flames flickered weakly, casting long, restless shadows across the stone walls. Queen Kira sat on her throne, unmoving, her dark eyes locked on the human standing before her. Captain Elias Carter knew this moment was critical. He had learned the painful history of the Irathan, their betrayal, their suffering. And now he had to convince their queen to trust him, if only for a moment. The Irathan warriors lined the hall, their sharp weapons gleaming under the dim light. They were ready to strike at the slightest command. Elias could feel their hatred in the air, thick and heavy. But he did not waver. Skira's voice broke the silence. "You are still here, human," she said, her tone filled with quiet disdain. "I allowed you to live for one night. That was more than enough mercy." Elias met her gaze. "I am here because your people are running out of time," he said firmly. "The Dakar Empire is growing stronger. They are preparing their final attack. And when they strike, they will not leave anything behind. Not even you." The queen's mandibles twitched in irritation, but she did not look away. "We do not need your warnings. We have survived worse." Elias shook his head. "No, you haven't. This time is different. Your armies are weakened. Your cities are crumbling. You fight bravely, but bravery alone will not stop what is coming." He took a step forward. "But we can stop them. Together." The hall fell into complete silence. Then, a sudden burst of laughter echoed from one of the Irathan warriors. It was deep and bitter, filled with disbelief. "You think we would fight side by side with humans?" The warrior sneered. "We would rather die than accept your pity." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elias clenched his fists but kept his voice steady. "This is not pity. This is survival." He turned to face the warriors. "You call yourselves warriors. But warriors do not fight just for their pride. They fight for victory. For their people. For the future." Skira watched him closely, her expression unreadable. "And what do you fight for, human?" she asked. Elias took a breath. "I fight for the same thing you do. For my people. For a future where we do not have to live in fear of the Dakar." His eyes burned with determination. "But I also fight for something more. I fight for the chance to prove that not all species are the same. That not all outsiders bring betrayal." For the first time, something shifted in Zakara's gaze. A flicker of hesitation, a whisper of something unspoken. But before she could respond, another warrior stepped forward. A massive Irathan general with deep scars running across his exoskeleton. His voice was like thunder. "Enough words, human. If you wish to fight alongside us, then prove your worth, not with speeches, but with strength." A low growl of approval filled the hall. The Irathan understood strength. They respected power. And if Elias wanted to stand beside them, he would have to earn his place. The general turned to the queen and bowed his head. "Allow me to challenge him, my queen. If he survives, perhaps he is worth listening to. If not, then he dies, and we waste no more time on his empty promises." Queen Kira looked at Elias. "Do you accept this challenge, human?" Elias could feel the weight of her words. This was not just a test. This was his only chance. He nodded. "I accept." Skira leaned back in her throne, her voice cool and distant. "Then tomorrow, at dawn, you will fight. And we will see if you truly deserve to stand before me." The hall erupted into murmurs once more as Elias turned and walked away. He knew this battle would not be easy, but he had no intention of losing. Because if he did, humanity's last chance at an alliance would die with him. The Irathan arena was nothing like the grand halls of their palace. It was a circular pit of rough stone, surrounded by jagged walls that had been stained by centuries of battle. The sky above was dark, the twin moons casting a pale glow over the scene. Captain Elias Carter stood at the center of the arena, rolling his shoulders as he prepared himself. He had been in many fights before, against human enemies, against nature, even against impossible odds. But this was different. This was a battle to earn respect. The Irathan warriors had gathered around the pit, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Some muttered among themselves, doubting whether a human could even survive against one of their strongest warriors. Others simply waited, eager to see blood spill on the stone. On the far side of the pit, Queen Kira stood tall, watching silently from her elevated throne. She had given Elias this chance, but her expression remained unreadable. Then the ground trembled slightly as Elias's opponent entered the arena. The Irathan general, Varkesh, was massive, nearly 7 feet tall. His exoskeleton was thick and battle-worn, covered in deep scars that told stories of countless victories. His 4 arms flexed as he stepped forward, the 2 lower ones gripping a pair of curved blades while his upper hands remained clenched into fists. His deep-set eyes burned with intensity. Elias exhaled slowly. "All right, Carter," he muttered to himself. "You've faced worse." A horn sounded from above. The fight had begun. Varkesh moved first, charging at Elias with terrifying speed. For such a large warrior, he was incredibly fast. His blade sliced through the air, aimed straight for Elias's throat. Elias barely dodged in time, twisting to the side as one of the blades cut through the sleeve of his uniform. He felt the sharp wind of the swing against his skin, a reminder that a single mistake could be fatal. Before he could react, Varkesh's upper fist slammed into his chest. The force sent Elias stumbling backward, pain exploding through his ribs. He hit the ground hard, coughing as dust rose around him. The Irathan warriors above cheered. "Is this the strength of humans?" Varkesh sneered, his voice filled with disdain. "Pathetic." Elias clenched his fists and pushed himself back up. His body ached, but he refused to stay down. "Not bad," he admitted, wiping dust from his face. "But I fought bigger things than you." Varkesh growled and lunged again. But this time, Elias was ready. Instead of dodging backward, he stepped forward, straight into the attack. At the last moment, he twisted his body, narrowly avoiding the blades and slipping inside Varkesh's range. Then he struck. A sharp, powerful punch to Varkesh's side, where the exoskeleton was slightly weaker. The Irathan warrior grunted in surprise as the impact sent a tremor through his body. It wasn't enough to do serious damage, but it was enough to make him take a step back. Elias didn't stop. He moved quickly, ducking under Varkesh's next strike and delivering another blow to the same spot. He was fast, faster than the Irathan had expected. Varkesh roared and swung one of his lower arms in a wide arc. Elias barely managed to raise his arm in defense, but the force of the blow sent him skidding backward. His arm throbbed, but he forced himself to ignore the pain. The Irathan warriors above had gone silent. They had expected a quick fight, a human crushed within moments. But now, they were watching something different. They were watching a warrior. The fight continued. Varkesh attacked with relentless force, his blades slicing through the air, his fists striking like hammers. But Elias did not fall. He moved with precision, dodging, countering, adapting to his opponent's style. He struck when it mattered, sharp, controlled blows to Varkesh's weaker points. He couldn't match the Irathan's raw strength, but he didn't need to. He used speed, strategy. Then, after a brutal exchange, an opening appeared. Varkesh overextended, swinging too wide in frustration. In that split second, Elias moved. He ducked low, swept his leg out, and knocked the Irathan warrior off balance. As Varkesh stumbled, Elias launched himself forward, slamming his fist into the warrior's chest, with every ounce of strength he had. Varkesh fell to the ground. The arena went silent. For a long moment, neither warrior moved. Then, Varkesh groaned and tried to push himself up, but his arms trembled. He was too weak to rise. The fight was over. Elias stood, breathing heavily, his fists still clenched. His body ached, his ribs burned, but he remained standing. Queen Skira rose from her throne. The Irathan warriors waited, their eyes fixed on her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, finally, she spoke. "You fought well, human," she said. Her voice was quieter than before, but there was something new in it, something close to respect. "You have earned the right to speak further, but do not mistake this for victory." Elias gave a small nod. He knew this was not the end, but it was a step forward. Varkesh, still on the ground, let out a low, grudging laugh. "You are stronger than you look, human," he admitted. "Perhaps not all of your kind are weak." Elias smiled faintly, glad to hear it. As he stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by warriors who had once doubted him, he knew one thing for certain. He had taken the first step toward proving humanity's worth, and he would not stop until he had earned the Queen's trust. Elias Carter sat on the stone steps outside the Irathan palace, his body still aching from the fight. His ribs throbbed with every breath. His arms were bruised, and his legs felt like they had been carrying a mountain. But despite all of that, he had won. The Irathan warriors who once looked at him with contempt now watched him with cautious respect. He had proven himself in combat, something they valued above all else. But this was just one battle. He still had to win the war for their trust. A shadow moved beside him. Elias turned to see Varkesh, the Irathan general he had fought earlier. The massive warrior crossed his forearms and studied Elias with a critical gaze. "You fought well, human," Varkesh said at last. "Better than I expected." Elias smirked, stretching his sore arms. "You hit like a starship crashing into a planet. I'll be feeling that for days." Varkesh let out a low, rumbling laugh. "You survived. That is more than I can say for many who have faced me." Elias nodded, his expression turning serious. "Will the Queen listen now?" Varkesh's amusement faded, perhaps, but the Queen is not easily convinced. She carries the weight of our people's past. She cannot afford to trust so easily. Before Elias could respond, a deep horn sounded from the palace. The Queen was calling for him. It was time. The grand hall was just as cold as before, but this time Elias walked with his head high. The Irathan warriors did not block his way. Instead, they watched in silence, waiting to see what their queen would decide. Queen Skira sat on her throne, her violet eyes unreadable. "You have survived the trial, human," she said, "and you have shown skill in battle. That is worthy of respect." Elias bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, Your Majesty." But Skira's gaze sharpened. Respect does not mean trust. She rose from her throne, stepping forward with slow, deliberate movements. "You have proven yourself as a warrior. But what of your people? You speak of alliance, yet how do I know that your kind will not betray us as others have?" Elias met her eyes. "I understand your fear. But humans are not the Dakar. We know the pain of betrayal too. That is why we want to stand with you, not against you." Skira studied him for a long moment. Then she turned to her warriors. "We will test his words," she declared. "If the human wishes to prove his people's loyalty, then he must complete a task for us." A murmur spread through the crowd. Elias tensed. What kind of task? Skira's mandibles twitched. "The Dakar Empire has established a forward base on our land. It is small, but it grows stronger every day. We do not have the forces to destroy it. But you—" She paused, her gaze piercing. "You will infiltrate it. You will bring us information on their plans." Elias's heart pounded. This was no simple task. A mission deep into enemy territory, alone. It was practically suicide. But he saw something in the Queen's eyes. This was his only chance. If he refused, all his efforts would be wasted. He exhaled slowly. "I'll do it." Skira's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted. Approval, perhaps. "Then prepare yourself, human. At dawn, you will leave. And we will see if your people are truly worthy of our trust." Elias nodded, determination burning in his chest. He had come to the Irathan seeking an alliance. Now he was going to war. The Irathan warriors gathered in silence as Elias Carter prepared for his mission. The air was cold, filled with the distant hum of alien wildlife. The twin moons above cast long shadows across the rocky terrain. Elias adjusted the lightweight armor the Irathan had given him. It wasn't as advanced as human technology, but it was sturdy and flexible. A curved Irathan dagger hung at his waist, and a small energy pistol was strapped to his thigh. Varkesh stood nearby, arms crossed. "This is a dangerous path, human," he said. "If you are caught, the Decare will not give you mercy." Elias gave a small smirk. "Good thing I'm not planning to get caught." Varkesh let out a deep chuckle, but his expression remained serious. "There is an old tunnel beneath the Decare base. It has been abandoned for years, but it may still lead inside. Use it wisely." Elias nodded. "Thanks. I'll get what the Queen needs." From the palace steps, Queen's Kira watched him. She had not spoken since giving him this task. But as he turned to leave, she finally spoke. "Prove me wrong, human." Elias met her gaze for a brief moment before disappearing into the night. The Decare base was a dark fortress of steel and stone, built into the cliffs of Irathan land. Towers lined the walls, scanning the landscape with bright searchlights. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their armor reflecting a dull red glow. Elias crouched behind a cluster of jagged rocks, watching carefully. He had seen Decare forces before, brutal, relentless, and highly disciplined. If they spotted him, there would be no escape. He took a deep breath and moved. The old tunnel entrance was hidden behind a layer of thick vines and stone. Elias pushed through, careful not to disturb the surrounding debris. The air inside was damp, the walls slick with moisture. He turned on a small light and pressed forward, each step echoing softly in the narrow passage. He wasn't sure if the tunnel would even lead him inside, but it was his best shot. Minutes stretched into an hour as he navigated the winding path. Then, finally, he saw it, dim lights ahead, flickering from metal grates in the ceiling. He had reached the base. Elias climbed up, pressing his ear to the grate. No sounds. Carefully, he lifted the metal cover and slipped inside. He was in. The Decare base was cold and sterile, with long hallways of black metal. The air carried a faint scent of burning fuel. Red emergency lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows. Elias moved quickly but cautiously, sticking close to the walls. He needed information, anything that could prove the Decare's true intentions. As he turned a corner, he froze. Voices. He pressed himself into a dark alcove as two Decare officers walked past. Their deep, guttural language was difficult to understand. But Elias caught enough. Final attack. Soon. Destroy them before they can unite. His heart pounded. The Decare weren't just preparing another raid. They were planning a full invasion. If the Irathan didn't act fast, they would be wiped out. He needed proof. Elias slipped into a nearby room, a communications hub. Holographic displays flickered with battle plans, supply routes, and attack formations. He activated his small recording device, capturing as much as he could. Then an alarm blared. Elias cursed under his breath. They know I'm here. He grabbed a small data chip from the console and ran. The base erupted into chaos. Kerr soldiers stormed the hallways, their weapons charged and ready. Elias sprinted through the corridors, dodging between cover as plasma bolts exploded around him. A guard appeared ahead, raising his rifle. Elias didn't hesitate. He threw himself forward, slamming into the soldier and knocking the weapon aside. The two struggled, but Elias managed to drive his elbow into the alien's gut. The guard stumbled, and Elias took the chance to escape. Almost there. The tunnel entrance was just ahead. But as he neared it, a blast of energy struck the ground beside him, sending him crashing to the floor. He groaned, his vision spinning. Heavy footsteps approached. A Decker commander stood over him, weapon raised. "Foolish human," the commander sneered. "Did you really think you could steal from us and leave alive?" Elias gritted his teeth. He was out of time. "Not leave," he muttered. "Fly." Before the commander could react, Elias pressed a small button on his wrist. Above, the sky erupted with light. A Urathan stealth ship, hidden until now, roared into view. Its cannons fired, striking the base with pinpoint precision. The distraction was enough. Elias rolled to the side, grabbing his pistol and firing. The shot hit the commander's armor, knocking him back just long enough for Elias to dive into the tunnel. He didn't stop running until he was far beyond the base, the sounds of alarms fading into the night. Back at the Virathan palace, Elias collapsed before the queen, breathless and bruised. He held up the data chip. "They're planning an invasion," he said, his voice hoarse. "We don't have much time." Sakura took the chip, her expression unreadable. Then, after a moment, she nodded. "You have done well, human," she said quietly. "Perhaps I was wrong about you." Elias exhaled, relief washing over him. The queen turned to her warriors. "Prepare the armies. We fight together." For the first time, the Urathan and a human stood side by side, ready to face the real enemy. And for the first time, the queen saw Elias not as an outsider, but as an ally. The Urathan palace was no longer silent. Warriors moved in every direction, preparing for war. Weapons were sharpened, armor was reinforced, and battle formations were planned. The air was thick with tension, but also with something new: unity. Elias Carter stood at the heart of it all, watching as the Urathan warriors prepared for their greatest battle. He still felt the bruises from his mission, but there was no time to rest. The Decker invasion was coming. Queens, Kira stood atop the palace steps, her violet eyes scanning her people. "The Decker have taken much from us," she declared. "They believe we are weak. They believe we will fall." She paused, her gaze shifting to Elias. "But today we prove them wrong. Today we fight not as divided tribes, but as one. And today we fight with an ally." A murmur spread through the crowd. The Virathan had never fought alongside another species, but Elias had proven himself. He had risked his life for them. And now, they were ready to fight by his side. Elias stepped forward, his voice firm. "The Decker think they can destroy you, but they don't know what's coming. Together, we can stop them. Together, we will win." The warriors let out a battle cry. The queen turned to her generals. To the battlefield. The plains outside the Urathan capital stretched wide under the darkened sky. In the distance, the Decker forces approached, rows upon rows of soldiers in red armor, their war machines towering behind them. Their ships loomed in the air, preparing for an all-out attack. Elias stood at the front lines beside Varikesh, gripping his weapon tightly. "You ready for this?" Elias asked. Varikesh smirked. "I was born ready, human." The ground rumbled as the Decker advanced. Their leader, a massive warrior with dark, jagged armor, stepped forward. "Urathan," the Decker commander bellowed, "this is your last chance. Surrender, and we will spare those who submit." Queen's Kira stepped forward, her expression cold. "We do not surrender." The commander let out a cruel laugh. "Then you will be crushed." He raised his hand, and the Decker army charged. The battle had begun. The battlefield erupted in chaos. Plasma fire lit up the sky as Urathan warriors clashed with Decker soldiers. The sounds of metal striking metal echoed across the plains. Elias moved quickly, dodging enemy fire, and taking down Dakar soldiers with precise shots. He wasn't as strong as the Wyrathan, but he was fast, and he used every bit of his training to stay ahead of the enemy. Varkesh fought beside him, swinging his massive blade and cutting through the enemy ranks. The Irathan warriors followed, their battle cries shaking the ground as they pushed forward. Above, Urathin and Dakar ships engaged in fierce aerial combat. Explosions filled the sky, sending debris raining down. But the Dakar were relentless. Their war machines pushed forward, firing devastating blasts that tore through the battlefield. The Irathan forces struggled to hold the line. Elias gritted his teeth. We need to take out those machines. Sikira, fighting with twin blades, nodded. Follow me. The three of them sprinted through the battlefield, dodging falling debris and enemy fire. They'd reached the first war machine, an enormous walking tank with thick armor. Elias quickly climbed onto its side, using every ounce of strength to hold on. He pulled out a small explosive device from his belt, attaching it to a weak spot near the joints. Varkesh. Now, Varkesh grabbed a fallen Dakar weapon, a heavy plasma cannon, and fired at the explosive. A massive boom shook the battlefield as the war machine collapsed, its legs giving out beneath it. One down, more to go. The battle raged on. The Irathan fought with all their strength, but the Dakar forces were overwhelming. The queen herself led the charge, her blades cutting through enemy after enemy. But then, disaster struck. A powerful blast from a Dakar warship struck the ground near Queen Zakira, sending her flying. She landed hard, unmoving. Elias's heart pounded. Queen! Varkesh roared, rushing to her side. Elias turned to see the Dakar commander approaching, his massive sword raised. She is finished, the commander sneered. Your alliance was meaningless. Elias tightened his grip on his weapon. You're wrong. With everything he had, he lunged at the commander. The two clashed in a fierce battle, Elias dodging powerful strikes, looking for an opening. Then he saw it. Using his speed, Elias slid under the commander's guard and drove his dagger into a weak point in the armor. The Dakar commander gasped, stumbling back. Elias didn't hesitate. He grabbed a fallen rifle and fired. The commander fell. A silence fell over the battlefield. The Dakar forces, seeing their leader defeated, hesitated. Zakira, slowly rising to her feet, raised her voice. This is your last chance. Leave our world, or fall like your leader. The Dakar, realizing they had lost, began retreating. Their warships lifted into the sky, vanishing into the darkness. The battle was over. Elias stood beside Zakira as the Irathan warriors cheered their victory. The queen turned to him, her expression unreadable. Then, for the first time, she gave him a slight nod. You have proven yourself human, she said. You are no longer an outsider. You are one of us. Elias smiled, glad to hear it. The war was not yet over, but something had changed. The Irathan and humans had fought together and won. And as Elias stood among his new allies, he knew this was only the beginning of something greater. Together, they would face the future. Together, they would survive. Together, they were strong. The end.